On August 26, 1883, at around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Sunda Strait between Java and Sumatra still looked like a place where ordinary life could continue. Ships moved through the narrow waterway. Telegraph lines still connected coastal towns to the outside world. In the port of Anja, people had already grown accustomed to the distant thunder of Krakatoa. The volcano had awakened months earlier, in May, sending columns of ash above its uninhabited island. Survey parties had approached it. Curious visitors had even come to watch. The danger seemed spectacular, but understandable. Ash, explosions, falling rock. Then, that afternoon, something changed. The detonations became almost continuous. A massive black column climbed above the island, and strange waves began reaching the coasts of Java and Sumatra. At first, they were not enormous, and that may have been the most deceptive part. People kept watching the sky, expecting the volcano itself to deliver the final blow. But the catastrophe was already building somewhere almost no one was watching, in the sea. By evening, Krakatoa had become a machine that seemed incapable of stopping. Explosions rolled across the strait again and again. Ash and pumice fell onto the decks of passing ships. Lightning flashed inside the volcanic cloud, while daylight faded beneath an expanding ceiling of darkness. And the sea was no longer behaving normally. Waves struck the coast, retreated, then returned. Captains in the region later described daylight turning almost into night as volcanic dust filled the air. But this was 1883. There were no ocean buoys watching for tsunami waves, no regional warning centers, no sirens capable of ordering an entire coastline to higher ground. Telegraphs could carry messages from one town to another, but they could not tell thousands of frightened people what the black sky and restless sea actually meant. Through the night, residents heard explosions and felt the ground tremble. Many stayed close to their homes. They had lived with Krakatoa's activity for months. They believed they already understood what the danger looked like. They did not. Then came the morning of August 27th. At around 5:30, an enormous explosion tore through the darkness, followed by another destructive wave. More explosions followed. Krakatoa was breaking apart in stages, as if the island itself were being ripped open from beneath. Then, at approximately 2 minutes past 10 in the morning, came the greatest blast of all. The sound was heard thousands of kilometers away. In parts of Australia and on Rodriguez Island in the Indian Ocean, people reportedly mistook the distant detonations for artillery fire. The atmospheric pressure wave raced around the planet and was recorded by instruments across the world. But close to Krakatoa, something far more deadly was happening. Much of the volcanic island was collapsing into a rapidly forming caldera, while enormous volumes of volcanic material were being displaced toward the sea. Modern research suggests that the giant waves may have been generated by several volcanic processes acting together, rather than by one single collapse. For the people waiting along the coast, the distinction meant nothing. The sea had just been given an almost unimaginable amount of energy. And this is where the story took its most terrifying turn. Anyone who survived that colossal explosion might have believed the worst had already happened. In reality, the deadliest part of the disaster was still moving toward them. Tsunami waves spread across the Sunda Strait, growing dramatically as they entered shallower coastal waters. Along parts of what is now Banten province, the largest wave is estimated to have reached roughly 41 meters, about the height of a large multi-story building. But a tsunami is not simply a towering breaker rolling toward the beach. It is an immense mass of moving ocean, capable of carrying boats, trees, rooftops, and entire structures inland. In Anya, Merak, and dozens of smaller settlements, people had only minutes. Houses were smashed apart. Vegetation was torn from the ground. Villages disappeared beneath violent, debris-filled water. Streets, warehouses, and homes that had existed that morning were reduced to mud, sand, and wreckage. The eruption had created the terror, but it was the water that turned Krakatoa into one of the deadliest volcanic disasters in recorded history. Across the strait in Sumatra, the situation was just as desperate. Waves entered bays and lowlands, their height and direction altered by the coastline itself. Ports vanished. Roads were severed. Communication with devastated settlements began to collapse. People who tried to run discovered the brutal physics of what was coming toward them. No human being could outrun a torrent powerful enough to carry buildings. Those who reached higher ground had a chance. For many living on flat coastal terrain, that higher ground was simply too far away. Some survivors on isolated islands reportedly climbed trees and held on as the water passed beneath them. Ships faced their own nightmare. The steamship Gouverneur General Loudon, near Telok Betong, survived powerful waves while destruction unfolded along the nearby coast. At sea, a captain could at least attempt to maneuver. On land, there might be no correct direction at all. Water could enter through a harbour, sweep across a road and flood a low valley almost simultaneously, cutting off escape routes within minutes. Then another deadly force entered the disaster. Superheated pyroclastic flows and clouds of volcanic material crossed stretches of open water and reached parts of the Sumatran coast. In places already shattered by tsunami waves, volcanic heat brought burns, fires, and another form of destruction. The sky remained dark. Ash filled the air. Familiar landmarks disappeared. And for the survivors, the catastrophe did not end when the first wave withdrew. More water could return. There was no modern emergency network moving rescue teams across the region, no digital flood map, no mobile warning, no national tsunami alert telling people exactly where to go. Decisions had to be made from sound, instinct, the behavior of the sea, and the direction in which other people were running. That is what made Krakatoa so devastating. Several destructive processes were unfolding almost at once, while the people caught between them were being forced to understand the disaster in real time. When the water finally began to settle, the true scale of the catastrophe could be measured by what was missing. 165 coastal settlements were destroyed. The official death toll is generally given as more than 36,000 people. More than 34,000 of them were killed by the tsunami. That single fact changes the way the entire disaster should be understood. Krakatoa's greatest killer was not sitting inside the crater. It was moving through the water between Java and Sumatra. The tsunami was detected far beyond Indonesia, with waves recorded across the Indian and Pacific Oceans, although nowhere else did they carry the same destructive power they unleashed inside the Sunda Strait. The eruption itself hurled enormous quantities of ash and volcanic material high into the atmosphere. In the months that followed, people around the world reported unusually vivid red sunsets, while instruments continued to reveal just how far Krakatoa's atmospheric disturbance had traveled. A disaster that erased coastal communities in minutes had left a measurable signature across the entire planet. Krakatoa became one of the first great natural disasters of the modern communications age to be studied on a truly international scale. Telegraph networks carried reports across the world. Sailors, colonial officials, and scientists documented what they had seen. Researchers later assembled observations of pressure waves, ashfall, tsunami heights, and atmospheric effects from locations separated by thousands of kilometers. For science, Krakatoa became an extraordinary case study in how one volcanic event could disturb the ocean and atmosphere on a global scale. But its most important lesson was far simpler and far more unsettling. The danger from a volcano does not end at the edge of its slopes. Sometimes people can die dozens of kilometers from the crater without ever seeing lava or being struck by falling rock. In 1883, the people of Java and Sumatra listened to Krakatoa's explosions and watched the darkened horizon, waiting for the volcano to deliver its final blow. But the deadliest force came from the sea, and that is why the story of Krakatoa still matters today. In the most dangerous disasters, the threat everyone is watching is not always the one that kills them. Sometimes, after the loudest explosion, the worst part is only beginning.